All right, today we're going to do something a little different. We're diving into an ancient legal puzzle, basically a detective story straight out of the Talmud. We're going to look at a single sentence, about 2,000 years old, that has a hidden contradiction, one that took some of history's sharpest minds to solve. So let's get into it.
So our case begins right here, with this line from an ancient Jewish legal text, the Mishna. On the surface, it seems pretty straightforward. Everyone slaughters an animal, and their slaughter is valid. Sounds simple enough, right? Like anyone can do it, and it's all good. But the ancient sages, they saw something totally different hiding in plain sight.
And here's where the mystery really starts. That first part, everyone slaughters, feels like a big green light. It implies you have permission from the very beginning. But the second part, their slaughter is valid, sounds more like an official checking your work after you're done. It implies validation after the fact. So which is it? Why would you need to validate something if it was already permitted from the start? This is the contradiction that launched 1,000 years of debate.
To solve this, a lead detective, if you will, steps onto the scene. The Babylonian sage, Rabba bar Ula. He looked at this contradiction and came up with a brilliant theory that completely reframes the whole problem.
Rabba bar Allah's big aha moment was realizing the law wasn't just talking about a single scenario. He argued that it's cleverly addressing two different situations at the exact same time. The key, he said, isn't who is doing the slaughtering, it's what is being slaughtered.
Here's his theory laid out. For a ritually impure person, the rules actually change based on the animal. That first part of the law, everyone slaughters, well, that applies to regular, non-sacred animals. In that case, an impure person has permission right from the start. But for holy, sacrificial animals, the rules are way stricter. They are not permitted from the start. See how that one distinction just neatly explains the two different tones in the original law? But you solve one problem, and another one just pops right up. This solution immediately creates a new, very practical issue. Ritual impurity can be transferred by touch. So, if an impure person is slaughtering a sacred animal, how do they possibly avoid contaminating the holy meat? Because that would make the whole sacrifice invalid.
The sages came up with this just ingenious, real-world solution, the long knife method. By using a knife with an especially long blade, the person could make the cut correctly while keeping their hands physically away from the animal's flesh. No touch, no transfer of impurity. Problem solved.
And this brings us right back to the second half of our contradiction. This is why the law says their slaughter is valid. It's an after-the-fact ruling, specifically for the case of a sacred animal. The slaughter is only deemed valid if the person can testify afterward, I am absolutely certain I didn't touch the meat. So, there it is. The first phrase applies to non-sacred animals, and the second applies to sacred ones. The contradiction is resolved.
But just when we think the case is closed, the Mishna throws in a new piece of evidence. It says there's an exception to all these rules, and it names 3 specific groups of people whose slaughter is always invalid.
So the text excludes a deaf-mute, an imbecile, and a minor. And the sages were incredibly specific about the potential mistakes. They worried these individuals might, say, pause during the cut or press down too hard instead of slicing cleanly. These are really technical errors that would invalidate the whole process.
Okay, now the Mishna adds another layer. It says that for all of them, if someone is supervising, their slaughter is valid. And this kicks off a whole new line of inquiry for the sages. Who exactly are they?
This becomes a classic logic puzzle. The text is maddeningly vague. So the sages do what any good detective would. They start a process of elimination, looking at every possible suspect to figure out who this supervision clause is even talking about. First up, could they be the 3 incompetent individuals we just mentioned? The sages say no, and their reason is amazing. It's based on a subtle clue in the original Hebrew grammar. Since this clause comes right after that list, the phrasing would typically be different. The fact that it's not phrased that way is like a linguistic fingerprint that rules this group out.
Okay, what about suspect number 2, the ritually impure person slaughtering a regular, non-sacred animal? Well, the sages eliminate this one too, using our earlier logic. Remember Rabba bar Ula's theory? We already established their slaughter is permitted from the very start. They don't need a supervisor. So through elimination, we get our answer. The supervision is for the impure person slaughtering a sacrificial animal, but, and this is key, only in a very specific scenario, when that person isn't around afterward to be asked if they touched the meat. In that case, the supervisor's eyes serve as a substitute for the person's testimony.
The supervisor confirms that purity was maintained. It's just an incredibly elegant and precise solution. You'd think the investigation would end there, but no. The sages pushed even deeper. They actually tried to find a flaw in their own perfect theory. And they found one, and it all centered on the slaughtering knife itself.
This is the ultimate gotcha question that threatens to unravel the whole case. I mean, think about it. If the person is impure, wouldn't they just transfer their impurity to the metal knife, which would then touch the flesh and contaminate the meat, making that whole long knife solution totally pointless? It really seems like a massive plot hole.
But the sages had an answer. And it all comes down to a simple rule. Not all impurity is created equal. Think of it like this. A major impurity, like from contact with a corpse, is powerful enough to transfer to a metal knife. But a minor impurity, like from a creeping animal, isn't. A person with only this minor impurity can handle a knife without making it impure.
And this distinction gives us two final, just razor-sharp solutions. First, the law could be talking about someone with that lesser, non-transferable impurity. In that case, the knife stays pure. Or, second, even if the person had the highest level of impurity from a corpse, the law still works if they didn't use a metal knife at all, but instead used something like a sharp reed stock, which is a material that cannot become ritually impure.
And with that, the case is finally closed. What started as a simple contradiction, everyone slaughters versus their slaughter is valid, has been completely resolved. Through this painstaking, step-by-step logical deduction, every word, every clause, and every single potential objection in the original law has been accounted for.
So what's the ultimate takeaway from this ancient legal mystery? It's really not just about the rules of slaughter. It's a masterclass in a unique way of thinking, a mindset where no detail is insignificant and every single word is a clue. It shows us this intellectual world built on the belief that with enough logic and precision, any contradiction can be resolved, and you can make perfect sense out of even the most puzzling text.